In the next few minutes, I'll show you everything you need to know to use the DJI Flip properly, what hidden features it has, and how to get the most out of the Flip. To keep the overview, this tutorial is divided into 15 parts. You should charge all the batteries right at the beginning. If you only own the drone, you can charge it via the USB-C port on the left-hand side. If you have the Flight Mode combo, you can also charge the battery using the supplied charger. You remove the battery by pressing the two buttons on the left and right and pulling the battery upwards. As soon as it is fully charged, simply push it in so that it snaps into place on both sides. As a general rule, as soon as the battery is fully charged, all 4 LEDs will light up green. Okay, my Flip is fully charged. Now I'll show you the folding mechanism. To do this, you first need to remove the gimbal protection by gently pressing it together on the left and right. You can now carefully pull it out. I say carefully because it can easily happen that the camera gets caught on the gimbal protector. The camera is also protected by a rubber cover. You can easily remove this, but it's not suitable for further use, so you should dispose of it. Now you can fold first the 2 front arms and then the 2 rear arms outwards. As soon as you have unfolded one rear arm, the drone will switch on automatically. When folding, start with the rear arms and then with the front arms. As soon as both rear arms are folded, the drone starts a countdown to switch itself off again automatically. You can interrupt this countdown by pressing one of the 2 buttons. So remember, if you press one of the 2 buttons unintentionally when folding the arms, you will unintentionally interrupt the switch off process and the drone will remain switched on. This has happened to me several times. You should activate your DJI Flip right at the start and update the firmware immediately. I'll show you how to do this in a moment. But before that, let's take a quick look at the drone itself. The DJI Flip has 2 buttons. The button on the right hand side is, as I said, the power button, which you can use to switch the drone on and off. The button on the left hand side, so next to the USB-C port, is the so-called mode button. This allows you to change the mode for the quick shots or smart snaps, as DJI calls them. The SD card slot is located next to the mode button. The Flip also has an internal memory. However, this is only 2 GB in size and is therefore only sufficient for special cases and short recordings. You should therefore use a relatively fast microSD card such as the SanDisk Extreme or Extreme Pro. The camera is attached to a 3-axis gimbal, which enables very cinematic shots. You should always remove the gimbal cover before switching on the Flip. This is the only way the gimbal can calibrate itself correctly. The Flip has sensors on the underside and also an infrared sensor system on the front. This is designed to prevent collisions with obstacles. However, it has no sensors on the sides or back. So if you fly sideways or backwards, you need to be careful because the drone will fly into obstacles without braking. To prevent a quick crash and major damage, the Flip has propeller guards. Damaged propellers can also be replaced relatively easily. However, the propeller guards do not protect against minor injuries to the fingers. You should therefore be careful how you hold the drone when it is switched on and not get too close to the propellers. As we have seen, the Flip activates automatically when you unfold the arms. You can also switch it on by briefly pressing the power button once and then pressing it a second time. And the second time you press and hold. As you can see, the Flip activates itself and searches for a connection. The icon of the currently active flight mode lights up at the front. I'll explain the Flip's 6 flight modes in more detail in a moment. This is the status indicator. If it lights up green, everything is okay. If not, it lights up yellow or red, for example when the battery is empty. By the way, you can switch off the drone with the power button in the same way as you switched it on. So by briefly pressing the power button once and then pressing and holding it. Now we need to activate the Flip and update the firmware. To do this, you need the DJI Fly app. For iPhone, you can find it in the App Store. For Android, you need to download it from the DJI homepage. To activate the Flip, you should also switch on the remote controller and connect it to the smartphone. Today, I use the RC and free controller without display. With this controller, your smartphone acts as a display. The Flip is of course also available with the RC2 controller, which has an integrated display. Operation is the same with both controllers. With both controllers, you have to remove the sticks from the storage slots and then screw them in. On the N3 controller, the slots are on the front. On the RC2 controller, which is the controller with the display, they are on the back. While you should also fold up the antennas on the RC2 controller, you must always connect the N3 controller to your smartphone. To do this, pull out the smartphone holder, clamp your smartphone in with the port on the right hand side and connect it to the controller's integrated cable. For all those who have an iPhone with a lightning connection, a lightning connection cable is included in the packaging. You can plug it in here at the top. Regardless of which controller you have, you switch on the controller in the same way as the drone itself. So by briefly pressing the power button once and then pressing and holding it. Okay, when the controller and the drone are switched on, you start the app and are ready for the activation. Once the drone is activated, you should download and install the latest firmware. The Flip is now activated and updated, so we can finally take off. There are several ways to control the DJI Flip, via remote control, but also just by using the smartphone app. The Flip also comes with several predefined flight modes. When using one of these automated flight modes, you can basically fly the Flip without a smartphone and without a remote control. DJI also refers to this as palm control. The Flip takes off from the palm of your hand, flies the predefined flight mode and then lands on the palm of your hand again. This works surprisingly well. Even if you take off and control the Flip using palm control, I would still recommend connecting the Flip to your smartphone. This simply has several advantages. You can use your smartphone to adjust settings for the individual modes, see a preview image of the camera, and if necessary, take a manual control of the drone and in an emergency, quickly abort the flight maneuver or initiate a landing at any time. And of course, you can also take off the Flip from your hand when connected to your smartphone. So let's take a closer look at controlling the Flip using palm control. How do you take off the Flip from the palm of your hand? It's best to hold the Flip with 2 or 3 fingers, like this. For example, if you hold it with your right hand, place your thumb on the mode button. The camera should usually be facing in your direction. It's important that no finger can get between the propellers when holding the Flip. Now use the mode button to select the relevant flight mode. As soon as you have selected the correct flight mode, press and hold the mode button. 2 things are important here. You must no longer move the Flip and the camera should be aimed at the subject, as the intelligent flight modes require a subject to be captured. If both are given, the drone will take off, start its flight and automatically fly the specified maneuver. After completing the flight path, the Flip will hover in place. Now walk towards it, extend your arm about half a meter below the drone and open your palm. The Flip should now land safely on your hand. If it doesn't work straight away, take a step back and try again. You will see that in most cases, this works quite well. However, before you send the Flip on its journey, you should know exactly how it will behave depending on the flight mode, if only to avoid a crash. After all, you need to know where it will fly to be able to estimate whether it will encounter an obstacle. We should therefore take a closer look at the different intelligent flight modes. Once you have connected the Flip to your smartphone via Connect, this interface opens. Now tap Follow at the top here and the selection of the flight modes will open. As you can see here, you can choose between 6 different flight modes. The last mode, the so-called custom mode, allows you to choose between 3 flight modes. If you simply want to try out the Flip for the first time, I recommend the first flight mode Follow. In this mode, the Flip will detect a subject before taking off. In most cases, this will be yourself, and it will then follow this subject. So if you move away from the drone, it will fly after you. What you should know, however, is that if you approach the drone, it will not fly backwards. It will only fly behind you, but will not follow you sideways or from the front. If you have connected the Flip to your smartphone, which I would always recommend, you can set the distance at which the Flip should follow you, and you can also set the height at which the Flip will follow you in the settings below. Ideally, you should do this before you take off. You can cancel the current maneuver, in other words the following, immediately using the stop button. This is useful if the drone is about to fly into an obstacle. And by tapping on the icon at the bottom left, you can also quickly take manual control of the drone if required. You can use these virtual control buttons to further correct the flight position of the Flip, and it will then continue to follow in the new position in follow mode. I will show you how this manual control works a little later. As with the other intelligent flight modes, the Flip starts recording immediately and automatically when in flight. You therefore do not have to start and stop the recording yourself. You can now land the Flip on your hand again as described. If necessary, you can also land it manually on the ground using the virtual control sticks. One thing that applies to all intelligent flight modes is very important. Although the Flip has sensors on the front to detect obstacles, these are only active if you control the Flip manually, meaning that they are not active when using the intelligent flight modes. The second flight mode is the so-called Dronie. In Dronie mode, the Flip captures the subject and flies backwards. taking a shot in the process. It then flies back towards the subject and takes a second shot. The result of the Dronie is therefore 2 shots. When connected to the smartphone, you can again change a few settings. You can decide whether the drone should also ascend when flying backwards or whether it should simply fly straight backwards. And you can set the maximum distance. Everything else is the same as in follow mode. The next recording mode is called circle. As the name suggests, in this mode the flip flies backwards again, thus establishing a certain distance, and then flies in a circle around the captured subject. This can also result in a very cool shot. In this mode in particular, you should of course always check in advance whether the drone could fly into an obstacle when flying the circle, as it will not circle the subject at a great height, but rather at eye level. You can use the smartphone to set the distance from which the flip should capture the subject in a circle. The maximum distance is 20 meters. In addition to flat, you can also set low as the height. If you select the rocket mode, the flip will fly straight up from the subject and film the subject from above during the ascent. It will shoot another video during the descent. Here too, you will therefore receive 2 separate recordings as a result of this flight mode. Here you can set the maximum altitude and whether the drone should rotate on its own axis during the ascent and descent. Spotlight is a very simple mode. In the case of Spotlight, the flip will simply hover in place and film the detected subject. It will therefore turn with the subject, but will not fly after the subject. In contrast to the other flight modes, you can also activate the photo mode here, whereby the flip will always take a photo if the subject remains in the same position for more than 3 seconds. In the last mode, which can also be called custom, you can select one of 3 different flight modes using your smartphone. Direction track is set by default. With direction track, it's important from which side the flip is looking at the subject while you activate the takeoff. If it's looking at the subject from the front, it will establish a certain distance after takeoff and always try to follow the subject from the front. So if you move towards the drone, it will fly backwards. If the camera is pointing at you from the left during takeoff, the flip will always try to follow you from the left. I've noticed that direction track works as long as you go slowly, but if you're going too fast, the flip will no longer be able to follow you correctly when flying backwards. Therefore, if it's no longer able to follow you in this way, it could choose a different angle. If the flip loses you, it will simply hover in place. If it picks you up again later, it will resume tracking. In the app, you can set the follow distance and the follow height. The second mode you can select under custom is helix. In this mode, the flip will fly backwards and circle around the subject. In this case, unlike in circle mode, it will ascend while circling and then descend again. This creates a relatively cool effect. In the app, you can set the distance from which the flip should film you. And the last intelligent flight mode is boomerang. And here the flip will also fly around the subject, but in an oval shape. Similar to helix, it will also ascend and descend again. You can also set the maximum distance for boomerang in the app. As already described, the flip will hover in place after completing one of these flight maneuvers. Now move towards the flip, stretch out your arm and open your hand under the flip. It should now land automatically on your hand. In direction track mode, turn towards the flip and stand still. It will now fly towards you and you put your hand under the drone again. We've already seen that you can also land the flip manually using your smartphone. The smartphone app also offers a range of other features. Up to now, we've always initiated the takeoff of the flip with a long press on the mode button. However, if you have connected the flip to the app, you also have the option of initiating the takeoff by pressing and holding the start button in the app. In this case, the flip can also be placed on the palm of your hand, or you can simply take off from the ground or another surface. And you can initiate the landing using the button here on the left. The flip will then land directly at its current position. You should therefore make sure that the position is suitable for a landing. The stop button is used to abort the task currently being performed. For example, an ongoing landing or a flight mode is aborted. If you're not interested in using one of the intelligent flight modes, you can also control the flip manually right from the start using your smartphone. To do this, switch to manual control mode and initiate the takeoff via takeoff. You'll now see the 2 virtual control pads on the screen again. With the help of these control pads, the flip is controlled like any other DJI drone. It's controlled as follows. If you swipe up on the right control pad, the drone flies forwards. If you swipe down, it flies backwards. If you swipe left, it flies sideways to the left, and if you swipe to the right, it flies sideways to the right. All relatively intuitive. However, if you swipe upwards on the left pad, it rises. If you swipe downwards, it sinks. And if you swipe to the left on the left cross, it turns to the left around its own axis. If you swipe to the right, it rotates around its own axis to the right. With a combination of several commands, you can create interesting camera movements in this way and, for example, fly forwards and ascend at the same time. You can also control the tilt angle of the camera by dragging this icon with the two arrows upwards or downwards. If you are now using one of the intelligent flight modes, you can use the same controls to adjust the position of the drone or the angle of the camera. And as seen earlier, you can also switch to manual control mode when using the app while in an intelligent flight mode. You can do this by tapping on this icon, as here in the case of Spotlight. Now you can immediately control the flip completely manually, as we have just seen. In contrast to the intelligent flight modes, a recording is not started automatically in manual mode, which means you have to start or stop a recording by tapping the red circle. You can switch between photo and video recording via the icon on the left. And what's particularly cool is that you can also control the flip using voice commands. To do this, tap on the icon here on the right, which now lights up green. Take off. And now you can use voice commands to tell the drone which maneuver you want it to perform. For example, the flip understands take off or land. It understands all the names of the intelligent flight modes, so follow, dronie, circle, rocket or spotlight. And it also understands commands such as closer, higher or lower. If you don't want to pick up your smartphone for this, you need to activate Voice Wake Up. You can do this here under Voice Control and Settings. You activate the voice command using Hey Fly. For example, hey fly and then take off, or hey fly and then follow. Don't forget, however, that many of these intelligent flight modes require the drone to detect a subject during takeoff. This means that you cannot start the flight mode from any position. If you want to use the flip for vlogging, for example, then you will particularly like the next feature. If you activate the microphone here, the flip will automatically capture the sound during the video recording, but the drone itself does not have any microphones. Instead, the sound is recorded via the smartphone. And not only that, the flip also supports the use of the DJI Mic 2 or sound recording via Bluetooth headphones. Under Album, you can then watch your videos, and when you download them, the sound recording of the smartphone or the additional microphone is automatically added to the recording. And the coolest thing is that the extremely annoying and loud propeller noise is also automatically removed from the recording.
This is an audio test of the DJI Flip.
This is an audio test of the DJI Flip. And this also works surprisingly well. Under Settings, we find a few more important additional setting options. In addition to the familiar settings for the intelligent flight modes, you can adjust the most important camera settings here, but the options are very limited when using an intelligent flight mode. You only have the choice between 4K and 1080. For vertical shots, in other words in a 9:16 format, you can choose between 1080 and 2.7K. Normally, you should always shoot with the highest possible resolution, which would be 4K for horizontal shots. Unfortunately, when using the Smart Snaps, only 30 frames per second are currently available. For a higher frame rate of 60 frames per second, you have to reduce the resolution to 1080. 60 frames per second looks smoother and more natural than 30 frames per second, and you can create a slow motion shot of up to 40% if required. But the image quality will suffer greatly from the reduced resolution. Interestingly, when using manual control, you can set the capture settings directly here below. And in this mode, you have significantly more frame rate options in 4K, including 60 frames per second, but also very low frame rates, such as 24 or 25 frames per second. Recordings with these low frame rates do not look as smooth and natural, but are considered particularly cinematic, because professional movies are shot at these frame rates and we have become accustomed to this look. But be careful, if you don't use ND filters, a shot with such a low frame rate can quickly look jerky, especially if there is a lot of movement in the shot. If you're not sure what to use at first, choose 4K and 30 frames per second. You won't go wrong. Whether under manual control or in the settings when using one of the intelligent flight modes, in addition to the normal color profile, you can also select D-Log M. This is a flat log profile. A log profile has significantly less saturation and contrast. It's particularly suitable for color grading, so if you want to edit the colors of your shot in post. You can download a LUT from the DJI homepage, with which you can convert the recordings in D-Log M into normal looking shots relatively quickly. But you should be aware that you have to edit every recording you take in D-Log, as you can hardly use them in this form. In the settings under Storage, you can select whether the recording should be saved on the internal memory or the SD card, and you can also format your storage. And under More Settings, you will find a range of additional setting options and information. For example, you can calibrate the gimbal here if it's causing problems. Generally applies. If you control the flip with your smartphone, the maximum height is 30 meters and the maximum range is 50 meters. You should also avoid flying over water. For more range, more setting options and also better manual control of the drone, you need to control the flip with a remote control. As mentioned, the flip supports 2 different remote controls, but the operation is identical. However, with the RC and free controller, you must of course always connect your smartphone and start the app before use. The drone can be operated with the remote control in almost the same way as with the app's virtual joysticks. The left and right joysticks have the same functionality as the app's control pads. You can adjust the camera angle using the wheel on the back left. You can start and stop a recording with the rear right button. To take off the drone, press both sticks diagonally downwards and inwards, or diagonally downwards and outwards. The motors will now start and you can take off. To switch the motors off again, press the left stick down a little longer after landing. You should also remember that you usually control the drone manually with the remote control, so you always have to start a recording manually. Apart from that, there are a few important additional features when using the remote control that are not available without it. With the remote control, the flip can not only fly much further away, it can also fly faster. You can switch between normal, cine and sport flight modes with the remote control. In sport mode, the drone flies a little faster, but a little less stable than in normal flight mode. And in cine mode, the exact opposite is the case. The flip flies a little slower, but more stable for more stable and therefore more cinematic shots. The remote control also has a pause and return to home feature. If you press this button once briefly, the flip interrupts the current maneuver and brakes immediately. Therefore, you should press this button if there is a risk of a crash. If you press the button for longer, the flip will automatically fly back to the registered home point, which is particularly useful if you have lost sight of the drone. The return to home feature is one of the most important features that are only available when using the remote control. The intelligent flight modes also differ slightly when using the remote control from the smart snaps, which are available without the remote control. You can select a subject via the display by drawing a frame around it. Now you have the choice between Spotlight, Active Track and Point of Interest. In the case of Spotlight, the drone and therefore the camera will always be aimed at the subject. However, you control the flight manually yourself and can therefore take some pretty cool shots. In the case of Active Track, the flip will automatically follow a subject, similar to Follow, and in the case of Point of Interest, the flip will fly in a circle around the subject, similar to Circle, whereby you still have to set the speed before takeoff. In addition to the photo and the standard video mode, you can also use the remote control to select other shooting modes. To do this, tap on this icon above the shutter button. In video mode, you can also select slow motion here. This allows you to take very cool slow motion shots in 4K at up to 100 frames per second. With master shots, the flip will automatically take various typical predefined aerial shots and then merge them into a single video clip. You can only activate master shots once the drone has taken off. Now select a subject and tap Start. Depending on the distance to the subject, the flip will now automatically fly a route and take shots on its own. And as I said, then merge the individual clips into a single video. Very practical, just make sure there are no obstacles. The already familiar recording modes Dronie, Rocket, Circle, Helix and Boomerang are available under Quick Shots. While these need no further explanation, with Asteroid there is an additional quick shot. You select a subject. The drone will then automatically fly upwards and take a sphere panorama shot. The result is a short clip like this. Interestingly, this mode is not available without a remote control. And as you can see, you can also take a hyperlapse or a panorama photo with the flip. And the remote control offers another very important feature. Using the camera symbol at the bottom right, you can choose between automatic mode and pro mode. While you can only set the resolution and frame rate in automatic mode, it's possible to adjust all exposure settings manually in pro mode. To do this, simply tap on the settings here below. Here you can also set the white balance or make an exposure correction and expose the shots a little darker, for example. Of course, recording in 4K 60 is also possible when using the remote control. But there is one more important setting that you should know. For this, tap on the three dots at the top right. As you can see, a menu with further setting options opens. Under Camera, you can adjust various settings for advanced users. It's particularly interesting that you can also adjust the sharpness and the extent of the noise reduction here. For particularly cinematic shots, you should reduce the sharpness. There is one thing you should definitely know. All settings that you change here are saved. But if you then fly the drone without the remote control, they are not applied. These settings only apply when using the remote control. Once you have taken your recording, there are various ways to transfer it to your smartphone or PC. Of course, you can simply remove the SD card and transfer the files. In the smartphone app, you can select the recordings you want to transfer via Album and then click on Download at the bottom right. If the quick transfer mode is activated, the transfer will be much faster. And you can also simply connect the drone to your PC via USB-C cable. It will then be recognized as an external drive and you can transfer the video files. Incidentally, the Flip does not need to be switched on for this. You can find a link to current offers for the Flip and the most important accessories in the video description. I wish you lots of fun with your Flip. I think you should now know everything you need to know to fly your Flip successfully. So if this video was helpful for you, please give me a like as feedback. There will be more videos on the DJI Flip, so stay tuned and see you next time.